connect how each of us, the way we live our lives, connects to the larger global picture of warming and its consequences. And James Hansen was NASA's chief scientist and was primarily responsible for gathering the data that showed the warming of the Earth. Thank you for coming. Last week we talked about the whole issue of global warming, and there are two main facts from last week that I think would be a takeoff point for this week. And these are that global warming is caused by atmospheric gases, and the atmospheric gases that cause global warming are mainly carbon dioxide, and after carbon dioxide, the two other powerful atmospheric warming gases are methane and nitrous oxide. What is increasing is carbon dioxide on a steady basis. Okay, I don't know if you heard the news, but we are now at 400 parts per billion. Okay, and we started out at about 310, and we are at 400. The danger point was 350 parts per billion, so we're past danger point. So this 400 was crossed in the near the Arctic Circle just recently, okay, just a few days back. The latest data shows 400. Carbon dioxide cycles through. So we've been at high carbon dioxide before. In fact, that's what prompts some of the melting of ice in the glacial ages and so on and so forth. But it's never gone beyond to where it is today. It's never been at 400. Okay, so this is an experiment. Now, what I want to do today is actually, and one of the insidious things about our approach towards the Earth, and global warming in particular, is that we never connect everything, right? So we always think, well, you know, I'm going to change my light bulb here into the new regulation light bulbs, you know, which are highly efficient, and that's what I'm going to do. Okay, and maybe that's enough, right? Or I'm going to switch to a Prius, and maybe I'm doing, right? We never know how it all connects together. And all of it is because it's too complex a problem for us to know, right? For me, the light bulb, you know, even I've been looking at this and reading about this and teaching for the last 10 years. The light bulb didn't go off until last year. That's when I actually made the connection, all right? Not just between carbon dioxide and global warming, but how I live and global warming, right? I began to see myself as the problem. Not as the government as a problem, not as somebody, China as a problem, or somebody else as a problem, but myself as a problem. And that takes a light bulb moment. That is self-awareness. Okay. And self-awareness requires you to connect the dots. To take many, many pieces of seemingly disjointed information and put it all together, and then the light bulb comes off and you go, you know, I think there's something, a key to this whole problem that I am a part of. And that didn't happen until last year. And that is not to say that I was a completely, you know, uncaring or uninvolved, uninformed person. You know, I think I was modestly all of that, right? But you have to make a complete connection, and it's very complicated. Let me give you an example. One of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of Al Gore. Al Gore did a great thing to the world by giving his talk, right? His PowerPoint, The Inconvenient Truth. I think that's a great contribution to the world. I don't know if he invented the internet or not, but he definitely woke us up to the problem of global warming. Okay? And, however, Al Gore lives in a 10,000 square foot home and drives SUVs to all his talks. And he owns a ranch on which he grows cows. The light bulb has not gone on in Al Gore's head for some reason. Okay, because I will show you that it is all connected. Let's start with what we know. We are at 400. The Earth is warming. Okay. 5 years ago, there were deniers and skeptics and all these kind of people. And I used to accept that there are people like that, okay, and that it was fine for there to be people like that. Today, the data is too clear. There's too much data, and it's too consistent to let that be anything but ignorance. Okay. We cannot accept that is a valid viewpoint. Okay. This is not just happening for some unknown reason. We know why this is happening, okay, and it is happening. So there's no denying this. If you look at the record, you go in global temperature from, if you look at the pre-industrial, we are, on a constantly increasing trend. The prognosis is that by end of century, we'll be up by 0.8 to 1 degree above what it should be. Okay, about a degree above what it should be. And last time, James Hansen talked about that seems like a small quantity, but it's actually an enormous amount of energy imbalance. So if we are off by in global averages by about 5.5, the poles will be off by 1.5 to 2 degrees C. And that is why the snow caps are melting. That is why we don't have glaciers anymore. The pollution is causing the temperature to go up, not the other way around. Zero is the mean over all of time. This is what it was on average, right? So it's now this much higher than it was on average. Okay? By the end of the century, the projection is it's going to be about 0.8 degrees C above the mean, historical mean temperature. We have very, very extensive data on what the temperature records were on Earth going back to about 100,000. And there is actually no cause for skepticism about it at all. This is one thing that's pretty watertight. There are data from tree rings. There are data from 8,000 sites around the world. There's data from ice cores in the Arctic. There's incontrovertible data. Okay, and really, one should read the papers because I've read all of them, and I would put my scientific metal on it any day. Okay, so now you might so there's a whole currently there is almost no, I would say actually no doubt about the temperature data. Okay, the only point on which people can take issue is the cause for it. Are humans causing this? Okay, so this has been something that's been ongoing. There are several suggestions. Okay, one is fluctuations due to the core of the Earth. Okay, fluctuations due to the Earth's axis doing what are basically called precession movements. Okay, slight movements, errors in the Earth's axis. There are potential fluctuations due to solar flaring, for instance, or solar activity. Okay, so there are lots of these causes. And there has been a lot of study on whether these causes can be causing these temperature changes. And it's not possible that those are the causes, for the reason that the variation of temperature has occurred over the last 100 years. Okay, and it's a steady rise of temperature. Okay, except for things like volcanic events and something like that. Okay, volcanic events tend to diminish temperature, make temperature drop for a while, blah blah blah, like and Earth adjusts. Yes. So temperature has been rising constantly, but these things that you're talking about, the Earth's interior movements of the Earth's axis, the sun's activity, these are very long time scale events. Okay, what would be a good indication of very long time scale events? One could think that, for example, why is the United States economy You can look at the stock market, right? The stock market goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down on a daily basis. Okay? And it's caused by all sorts of crazy stuff. But if you look at the US economy, the US economy is a long time scale, and generally it's trending upward all the time. Okay, maybe not as 4%, but it's trending upwards, right? So the economy is growing, right? So that is a long time scale event, while the stock market going up and down is a short time scale event. Okay, the stock market going up and down on a daily basis has nothing to do with the US economy growing on a long time scale basis and vice versa. They're uncorrelated. What is the trend that has been occurring over the last 100 years that is matched with the rise in temperature? The thing that has been happening is the rise in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Okay. So it's been constantly increasing, and if you look at where it started increasing around this point, right, 1900. Okay. It's a steady rise. If you look at deforestation, the deforestation has been pretty steady. Correct? So another thing people say is it's not because of carbon dioxide increasing, it's because of forests going away, or the fact that we're removing forests. And that has been happening. But that has been happening on a pretty steady basis throughout time. Okay, so if you look at this chunk, that's deforestation. Okay? While this is fossil fuel emissions, the carbon dioxide that's coming out because of burning oil and coal and so on and so forth. But here's the graph that shows Earth temperature, correct? And carbon dioxide released due to fossil fuels. So it's basically completely in line with the trend for temperature rise. Now you can think about it. Would you say that, for example, deforestation is causing this steady uptick in carbon dioxide? No. You won't say that because it's not completely correlated with it, right? Although deforestation does play a role, and I'll point out how. Okay. But the correlation between carbon dioxide increase and temperature is fairly established. Now, actually, you can make a correlation between any two curves. Okay, correlation is not hard to establish. You can take, for example, number of people who died in accidents in Iowa, right? Over time, and perhaps number of oranges grown in Florida over time, correct? Both have increased. So would you say that growing oranges in Florida kills people in Iowa? Those are correlated curves. They're both increasing over time, right? But just because there is correlation does not mean there is causation. Okay, causation is a more intimate connection between those two curves. Now, what is it that takes something from the realm of correlation to causation? A scientific law that governs that connectivity. Okay, right? There is no scientific law that connects oranges grown in Iowa to driving deaths oranges grown in Florida to driving deaths in Iowa. There's no scientific law that you can come up with that I'm aware of. Maybe there is. Okay, you never know. Right? But there is a distinct scientific law that connects carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to temperature rise, which is that carbon dioxide is what is called a greenhouse gas. Okay? If you look at the radiation that comes into the earth, it comes from a black body, which is a sun, that is at 5,500 Kelvin temperature. Okay? 5,500, about 5,300 degrees centigrade. Okay? The sun's surface. The earth radiates energy back. The earth is a cold body. Okay? So it's at about 30 degrees centigrade on average. Correct? It radiates energy back. The energy that is going back from the earth is at what is called long wavelengths, basically in the infrared range. And carbon dioxide is a gas that is ideally suited to absorbing energy in that range. Okay? And this is the greenhouse effect. So there are two elements. First, there is a correlation. Additionally, there is a definite causation. Okay. With all of those other reasons, for example, the interior of the Earth and the tilt of the Earth, the precession of the axis, or the sun-solar activity, it is very difficult to establish. First of all, they are on different time scales, and it's very difficult to establish causation. There is no correlation, and there is no causation. Okay. So, based on those two scientific principles that are not scientific principles that apply to this problem, but scientific principles that apply to every single problem that humanity has ever dealt with, without these two, there is no science. Okay? So either we can believe in science, or we can say we don't believe in science. We cannot be selective. So here's the fundamental fact. It depends on the carbon budget. It depends on how much carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere. And this is not guesswork. We have a very, very clear understanding of how much carbon is there, okay, and where it goes. Okay, so for example, the main sources of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are deforestation, the two pieces there on that previous curve, right? Deforestation, forests are going away, and we are dumping a lot of fossil fuels into the atmosphere. These are the main, there's pretty much, rest of it is just minute, okay? These are the main things. Okay, so if we remove forests and we burn this wood, the wood had a lot of carbon in it, all of that goes into the atmosphere. Okay, so that's pretty much what it's causing. Now, what happens when the carbon dioxide comes out of this? How does it divvy up? Well, about half of it goes into the air. About 30% of it goes into the trees, forests, take it back, right? Because forests breathe carbon dioxide. That's how they make wood. Right? So basically, that's basically absorbing carbon dioxide. And then some of it goes into the ocean and gets dissolved in the ocean. Okay? And this part that is dissolved in the ocean, the oceans are pretty saturated. Okay? The ocean uptake of carbon dioxide is a fairly slow process, and it's pretty saturated. And that is one reason why, for example, coral reefs around the world are dissolving, right? Because the ocean is acidifying. Okay? And when the coral reefs disappear, you might think, what is the big deal about coral reefs? When the coral reefs disappear, then all the fish cannot survive in the coral reefs anymore, which means that it goes all the way up the food chain. So we are destroying the ocean food chain by destroying coral reefs. Okay? But this is not a big concern for me. I'm going to focus a little bit more. People could talk to you about this until they're blue in the face. People are interested in the ocean. There are probably about 5,000 PhDs working on this problem. I'm concerned about this component here. I'm concerned about forests, and I want to make that connection. And you will see how the connection goes very, very deep. And then you will see all the vested interests creeping out, trying to keep the status quo. The vested interests include food companies. Okay. And I want to make the connection with food. So, forests are carbon deposit vaults. Okay. I don't know if you've heard this term carbon sequestration. Okay. So basically it is people saying, you know what, we need to take all the carbon and dump and pump it. One way of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is to take it out, right? And basically pressurize it into the earth and store it underground. You know that when they say that, it's a bad idea already. Okay? But the surefire way of sequestering carbon is to have forests. Okay? It's a complete no-brainer. This is the best way to take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. You take all of it and convert it into trees. Okay? Because trees, the larger the tree, the more carbon it's storing. And that's why we need rainforests, because you know rainforests have these incredibly huge trees with canopies and all that stuff, with trees growing under trees. Okay? So it's a very dense repository of carbon dioxide. There is no better way to store carbon dioxide than to have forests. Okay? With that said, let us see what we are doing to our forests. Forests absorb 1/3 of atmospheric carbon dioxide. And since they are dark, you see they are dark, right? And dark things absorb solar radiation. Okay? So they're very good at taking in solar radiation and not letting it go back to space. Correct? Which means that in both these ways, they contribute to cooling the earth. Okay? Plus they manage the water cycle. Without them, there's no water cycle. Okay, because of transpiration and all of this stuff, right? Okay? And this whole thing associated with bacteria, they seed bacteria into the atmosphere, okay, they float off, and the bacteria then seed raindrops and form clouds and all that stuff, okay? So there's a whole ecosystem that they maintain, right? Okay? So I want to talk about forests because that's something I got really interested in a couple of years ago. And that was my light about it. Forests. Once I got into thinking about forests, it just went down. This is how the forests looked before in the pre-industrial world. Okay, in the pre-industrial world. That's original forest cover on Earth. I want to point out India to you because India is what I have studied a lot. Okay, I want you to look at India, the forest in India. Okay. So even in British times, 200 years ago, India was 90% forested. Okay, at independence, so about 60 years ago, India was 47% forested.
What?
47% forest. Almost half of India was covered in forest. In British times, the old times, it was 90%. Okay, and that's why Kipling. Okay, and that's how you get Jungle Book. And all those nice stories, right? And I will return to Jungle Book later. I want to look at China. You see what China looks like there? Okay, almost confusing green. Okay. That's 2005. And this is satellite data. Okay, this is not guesswork. This is satellite data. Somebody was saying that the percentage of forest loss, and this is, I have it in good account because he's a forest expert, Iowa forest expert. The forest cover in Iowa as a percentage has diminished more than India has. Okay. But I do want to point out to you what has happened in India, and I want you to pay attention to Africa here as well, and I will go into the reasons for each region, what the forests are doing in each region. Okay? In India, we were at 90% forest 200 years ago. Today, we are at 7%. The government counts 10% tree cover as forest. No, Indian government. So all the figures are fake. Okay, the real NASA data says it's about 7%. Now you can also further split hairs. The reason I said that was you can further split hairs because the United States actually defines plantations as forests of a pine, for instance. But it does not support an ecosystem because in order to support an ecosystem, it should have its own regenerative cycle. Okay, if you, for example, cut the forest, clean cut it, right, and replace it, that's the only way to keep making the forest come back. Okay. Right. In old growth forests, you don't have to do anything, right? The entire forest system supports itself in terms of rainfall, in terms of flora and fauna. It can actually support the entire life cycle from the ant all the way up to the jaguar. Okay, we don't see that in pine forests. One of the contentions is that the plants are going to grow better at high temperatures and in fact high CO2 in the atmosphere than they have in the past. Okay, and that's been disproved lately also by some researchers in Texas. Even more of concern than just the forest disappearance, if you look at what we're going to lose in all of these forests. See, in China, the pandas rely on the forest. In India, tigers rely on the forest. Okay, if there are no forests, there are tigers. In Africa, You have the chimpanzees and gorillas that rely on the forest, okay? In the Amazon, you have the jaguars. And in Canada, you have the spirit bear. Okay, so these are, I put these animals out here because these are all the things that are sitting high on the food chain in each of these places. Okay? So if the forest goes away, clearly all of these guys are going to go away. All right? So deforestation is a different animal in different places. So if you look at Canada, and this particular part of the forest in Canada, this is called the boreal forest. I don't know if anybody here is from Canada originally, but that's a boreal forest. Okay, and the boreal forests are disappearing at the rate of about New Jersey every couple of years. Okay, state of New Jersey every couple of years. And you wonder, why is Canada cutting the forests? What do you think? Not wood, it's oil.
Oh.
Okay.
Sorry.
So this is the boreal. This is a picture of boreal from National Geographic. This is actually the before picture. The after picture looks like this. Those are the oil sands. Okay, and that is the Keystone project. That's the pipeline project. We want the oil from there.
Hi, everyone. The world's largest and most devastating environmental industrial project is situated in the heart of the largest and most intact forest in the world, Canada's boreal forest. It stretches right across northern Canada. In Labrador, it's home to the largest remaining wild caribou herd in the world, the George River caribou herd, numbering approximately 400,000 animals. Unfortunately, when I was there, I couldn't find one of them. But you have the antlers as proof. All across the boreal, we're blessed with this incredible abundance of wetlands. Wetlands globally are one of the most endangered ecosystems. They're absolutely critical ecosystems. They clean air, they clean water, they sequester large amounts of greenhouse gases, and they're home to a huge diversity of species. In the boreal, they are also the home where almost 50% of the 800 bird species found in North America migrate north to breed and raise their young. In Ontario, the boreal marches down south to the north shore of Lake Superior. And these incredibly beautiful boreal forests were the inspiration for some of the most famous art in Canadian history. The Group of Seven were very inspired by this landscape. And so the boreal is not just a really key part of our natural heritage, but also an important part of our cultural heritage. In Manitoba, this is an image from the east side of Lake Winnipeg, and this is the home of the newly designated UNESCO Cultural Heritage Site. In Saskatchewan, as across all of the boreal, home to some of our most famous rivers, an incredible network of rivers and lakes that every school-age child learns about, the Peace, the Athabasca, the Churchill here, the Mackenzie. And these networks were the historical routes for the Voyageur and the Coureur de Bois, the first non-Aboriginal explorers of northern Canada that, taking from the First Nations people, used canoes and paddled to explore for a trade route, a northwest passage for the fur trade. In the north, the boreal is bordered by the tundra. And just below that, in Yukon, we have this incredible valley, the Tombstone Valley. And the Tombstone Valley is home to the Porcupine Caribou herd. Now, you've probably heard about the Porcupine Caribou herd in the context of its breeding ground in Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Well, the wintering ground is also critical, and it also is not protected and could be potentially exploited for gas and mineral rights. The western border of the boreal in British Columbia is marked by the Coast Mountains. And on the other side of those mountains is the greatest remaining temperate rainforest in the world, the Great Bear Rainforest. And we'll discuss that in a few minutes in a bit more detail. All across the boreal, it's home for a huge, incredible range of indigenous peoples and a rich and varied culture. And I think that one of the reasons why so many of these groups have retained a link to the past, know their native languages, the songs, the dances, the traditions, I think part of that reason is because of the remoteness, the span, and the wilderness of this almost 95% intact ecosystem. And I think particularly now, as we see ourselves in a time of environmental crisis, we can learn so much from these people who have lived so sustainably in this ecosystem for over 10,000 years. In the heart of this ecosystem is the very antithesis of all of these values that we've been talking about. And I think these are some of the core values that make us proud to be Canadians. This is the Alberta Tar Sands, the largest oil reserves on the planet outside of Saudi Arabia. Trapped underneath the boreal forests and wetlands of northern Alberta are these vast reserves of this sticky, tar-like bitumen. And the mining and the exploitation of that is creating devastation on a scale that the planet has never seen before. I want to try to convey some sort of a sense of the size of this. If you look at that truck there, it is the largest truck of its kind on the planet. It's a 400-ton capacity dump truck. And its dimensions are 45 feet long by 35 feet wide and 25 feet high. If I stand beside that truck, my head comes to around the bottom of the yellow part of that hubcap. Within the dimensions of that truck, you could build a 3,000 square foot, two-story home quite easily. I did the math. So instead of thinking of that as a truck, think of that as a 3,000 square foot home. That's not a bad sized home. And line those trucks/homes back and forth across there from the bottom all the way to the top. And then think of how large that very small section of one mine is. Now you can apply that same kind of thinking here as well. Now here you see, of course, as you go further on, these trucks become like a pixel. Again, imagine those all back and forth there. How large is that one portion of a mine? That would be a huge, vast metropolitan area, probably much larger than the city of Victoria. And this is just one of a number of mines. 10 mines so far right now. This is one section of one mining complex, and there are about another 40 or 50 in the approval process. No tar sands mine has actually ever been denied approval, so it is essentially a rubber stamp. The other method of extraction is what's called the in situ. And here, massive amounts of water are superheated and pumped through the ground through this vast networks of pipelines, seismic lines, drill pads, compressor stations. And even though this looks maybe not quite as repugnant as the mines, it's even more damaging in some ways. It impacts and fragments a larger part of the wilderness, where there's 90% reduction of key species like woodland caribou and grizzly bears, and it consumes even more energy, more water, and produces at least as much greenhouse gas. So these in situ developments are at least as ecologically damaging as the mines. The oil produced from either method produces more greenhouse gas emissions than any other oil. This is one of the reasons why it's called the world's dirtiest oil. It's also one of the reasons why it is the largest and fastest growing single source of carbon in Canada. And it is also a reason why Canada is now number 3 in terms of producing carbon per person. The tailings ponds are the largest toxic impoundments on the planet. Oil sands, or rather I should say tar sands. Oil sands is a PR-created term so that the oil companies wouldn't be trying to promote something that sounds like a sticky tar-like substance that's the world's dirtiest oil. So they decided to call it oil sands. The tar sands consume more water than any other oil process. 3 to 5 barrels of water are taken, polluted, and then returned into tailings ponds, the largest toxic impoundments in the planet. Syncrude, just one of the licensees in just one of their tailings ponds, dumps 250,000 tons of this toxic gunk every single day. That's creating the largest toxic impoundments in the history of the planet. So far, this is enough toxin to cover the face of Lake Erie a foot deep. And the tailings ponds range in size up to 9,000 acres. That's 2/3 the size of the entire island of Manhattan. That's like from Wall Street at the southern edge of Manhattan up to maybe 120th Street. So this is one of the larger tailings ponds. This might be what? I don't know, half the size of Manhattan? And you can see in the context, it's just a relatively small section of one of 10 mining complexes and another 40 to 50 on stream to be approved soon. And of course, these tailings ponds, well, you can't see many ponds from outer space, and you can see these, so maybe we should stop calling them ponds. These massive toxic wastelands are built unlined and on the banks of the Athabasca River. And the Athabasca River drains downstream to a range of Aboriginal communities. In Fort Chipewyan, the 800 people there are finding toxins in the food chain. This has been scientifically proven. The tar sands toxins are in the food chain, and this is causing cancer rates up to 10 times what they are in the rest of Canada. In spite of that, people have to eat this food in order to survive. The incredibly high price of flying food into these remote northern Aboriginal communities and the high rate of unemployment makes this an absolute necessity for survival. And not that many years ago, I was lent a boat by a First Nations man. And he said, when you go out on the river, do not under any circumstances eat the fish. It's carcinogenic. And yet on the front porch of that man's cabin, I saw 4 fish. He had to feed his family to survive. And as a parent, I just can't imagine what that does to your soul. And that's what we're doing. The boreal forest is also perhaps our best defense against global warming and climate change. The boreal forest sequesters more carbon than any other terrestrial ecosystem. And this is absolutely key. So what we're doing is we're taking the most concentrated greenhouse gas sink. Twice as much greenhouse gases are sequestered in the boreal per acre than the tropical rainforests. And what we're doing is we're destroying this carbon sink, turning it into a carbon bomb. And we're replacing that with the largest industrial project in the history of the world, which is producing the most high-carbon, greenhouse gas-emitting oil in the world. And we're doing this on the second largest oil reserves in the planet. And this is one of the reasons why Canada, originally a climate change hero, we were one of the first signatories of the Kyoto Accord. Now we're the country that has full-time lobbyists in the European Union and Washington, D.C., threatening trade wars when these countries talk about wanting to bring in positive legislation to limit the import of high-carbon fuels, of greenhouse gas emissions, anything like this. At international conferences, whether they're in Copenhagen or Cancun, international conferences on climate change, we're the country that gets the dinosaur award every single day as being the biggest obstacle to progress on this issue. Just 70 miles downstream is the world's largest freshwater delta, the Peace Athabasca Delta, the only one at the juncture of all 4 migratory flyways. This is a globally significant wetland, perhaps the greatest on the planet. Incredible habitat for half the bird species you find in North America migrating here. And also the last refuge for the largest herd of wild bison. And also, of course, critical habitat for a whole range of other species. But it, too, is being threatened by the massive amount of water being drawn from the Athabasca, which feeds these wetlands, and also the incredible toxic burden of the largest toxic unlined impoundments on the planet, which are leaching into the food chain for all the species downstream. So as bad as all that is, things are going to get much worse, much, much worse. This is the infrastructure as we see it about now. This is what's planned for 2015. And you can see here the Keystone Pipeline, which would take tar sands raw down to the Gulf Coast, punching a pipeline through the agricultural heart of North America, of the United States, and securing the contract with the dirtiest fuel in the world by consumption of the United States, and promoting a huge disincentive to a sustainable clean energy future for America. Here you see the route down the Mackenzie Valley. This would put a pipeline to take natural gas from the Beaufort Sea through the heart of the 3rd largest watershed basin in the world, and the only one which is 95% intact. And building a pipeline with an industrial highway would change forever this incredible wilderness, which is a rarity on the planet today. So the Great Bear Rainforest is just over the hill there Within a few miles, we go from these dry boreal forests of 100-year-old trees, maybe 10 inches across, and soon we're in the coastal temperate rainforest, rain-drenched, 100,000-year-old trees, 20 feet across, a completely different ecosystem. And the Great Bear Rainforest is generally considered to be the largest coastal temperate rainforest ecosystem in the world. Some of the greatest densities of some of the most iconic and threatened species on the planet. And yet there's a proposal, of course, to build a pipeline to take huge tankers 10 times the size of the Exxon Valdez through some of the most difficult to navigate waters in the world, where only just a few years ago a BC ferry ran aground. When one of these tar sands tankers, carrying the dirtiest oil 10 times as much as the Exxon Valdez, eventually hits a rock and goes down, we're going to have one of the worst ecological disasters this planet has ever seen. And here we have the plan out to 2030. What they're proposing is an almost 4-time increase in production, and that would industrialize an area the size of Florida. In doing so, we'll be removing a large part of our greatest carbon sink and replacing it with the most high greenhouse gas emission oil in the future. The world does not need any more tar mines. The world does not need any more pipelines to wed our addiction to fossil fuels. And the world certainly does not need the largest toxic impoundments to grow and multiply and further threaten the downstream communities. And let's face it, we all live downstream in an era of global warming and climate change. What we need is we all need to act to ensure that Canada respects the massive amounts of fresh water that we hold in this country. We need to ensure that these wetlands and forests that are our best and greatest and most critical defense against global warming are protected, and we are not releasing that carbon bomb into the atmosphere. And we need to all gather together and say no to the tar sands. I hope that you will all, if you've been moved by this presentation, join with the growing international community to get Canada to step up to its responsibilities, to convince Canada to going back to be a climate change champion instead of a climate change villain, and to say no to the tar sands and yes to a clean energy future for all. Thank you so much.
Why is Canada doing it then?
Money.
Why
does anybody do it?
Do they subsidize it? Do the Canadians subsidize it before they sell it?
No, I think people pay for it. So in fact, that oil is not actually, a lot of it is not going to go to the United States, it's going to go to China. Right. I'm much more concerned about tropical forests. So if you look at tropical forests, the maximum amount of deforestation is in Brazil. So Brazil is number 1, Indonesia is number 2, and then of course the rest of Africa, and South America bring up the bulk of the deforestation. Okay, but the king of deforestation is Brazil, and that's the Amazon, right? Just disappearing. So, and it's been pretty steady. If you look at the 1990s, Brazil had 23% of the deforestation around the world. Brazil is in the 2000s at 27%. So it's it's going away at a steady pace. Okay. So, and what is the reason for deforestation? This is why I want to make this connection here. The reason, one would think that the reason would be, simple logging for just paper or something like that, right? No. Logging is just about 10-15%. The bulk of it is this part here and that part there. Agriculture, right? And large-scale agriculture, read soy in Brazil, soy, and actually palm oil in Indonesia, soy in Brazil. And why do we grow all this soy and corn? Why do we grow corn in Ireland? 80% goes to feed animals. This is sort of reflecting what is happening in Indonesia, right? In that region. 1985 forest cover was about 74%, right? Okay, and we are about 44% right now, and by 2020 we'll be at about 32%. So you can see just the wheel's going to turn and then the forest. If you look at what is happening in Indonesia, it's basically in the last 20 years. That's palm oil production, that's why the forests are disappearing. Okay? But what is happening in Brazil? Okay? That's the Amazon, okay, the richest rainforest in the world. By all accounts, it's called, those are called the lungs of the earth because they clean the atmosphere. Okay, that's what breathes for earth. Okay, and so let's see what's happening there. So they're basically cutting it in strips. So it's getting like a bad haircut. The Amazon is getting a bad haircut. So they're cutting it in strips right here, and they're cutting it in the center all over these roads that go through it. I'll show you a video on this next time that shows exactly how this is happening. And look at what most of the cutting is for is cattle ranching. Okay, to grow cattle. And where does the beef go? The beef goes to, a lot of it goes to China. It goes to Russia, and some of it to the United States, and a lot of Western Europe. Okay. There's a lot of beef being exported. Brazil, in fact, became one of the top beef exporters. So in a decade, they basically, increased their beef production fourfold, okay, and became one of the top exporters of beef. And that's cattle production in Brazil. Okay. So now, what is happening in Africa? You see, Africa went from there to here, right? The African story is very, very similar. The Indian story is different. The Indian story is a little weird because, in India, people don't eat beef. Okay, so what is going on? I'll talk about that later. What's going on in India, apart from population pressures. But what is happening out there? So this is NASA image of fires, forest fires. Okay, and you see a region where the forests are all gone relative to that one there, right? The historical forests. And look at this image of where the forest fires are. Okay, it's the exact region where the forests have disappeared. So the forests are being burned by humans. 60% of all forest fires on Earth are set by humans intentionally for cattle ranching. Right? 75% of forest fires in Australia are set by humans. Australia is actually #1 in greenhouse gas emission. That region is where the gorillas and the chimpanzees were, and they are bushmeat now. So if you hear of Africans in that region eating bushmeat, they're eating gorillas. But the 800-pound gorilla, and this is something I talk about in my class, and I have great difficulty talking about it because I'm going to run up against a lot of people. And this is the light bulb that went off in my head. Okay, I have to connect everything. I do not believe in intellectual dishonesty. If there is something I'm thinking about, I'm going to follow it to its logical end, even if the consequences are not happy for me. Okay? And I took issue with my daughter's class this time, and she's in 4th grade, and I raised a stink about this, and was not very popular with her teacher, because they looked at Iowa and the water pollution in Iowa, and they did not make a connection with beef production. And I was really upset. And the teacher said, I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I said, forget that. Do you know what would have happened if Galileo had not made the connection between his astronomical observations and the fact that the Earth was not the center of the universe? Would we be in space right now? That's so dishonest. We should be teaching our kids to follow their thought processes to the logical end, even if it means it's discomforting. Not teaching them to be cowards. So here, this is the 800-pound gorilla. 2/3 of burning is for livestock raising. Okay, we are burning the planet to death. Look at this graph, it's very clear. I'm talking about cattle per capita in all the African countries, okay? So these are all African countries, and there's cattle per head. So in the United States, we are here at 0.3 cattle per head. This line is United States, okay? 0.3 cattle per head, which means that in the United States, there are about 100 million cattle. Right? 300 million population, over 100 million cattle. Okay? All of these countries have more cattle per head than the United States in Africa. That's their only currency. They sell, when you get married, the bride goes with cattle. Okay? So and this is true in India too. Anyway, watch this. All those countries that are per capita have more cattle than the United States, where are they located? Those are two, Botswana and Namibia. They're all burning the forest. That's exactly what they are. Okay? This is the story in Africa. That is the story in Brazil. This is going to be the story in India, not for beef, but for milk. And that's why I gave up drinking milk. I'm now completely vegan. I do not drink milk anymore because I cannot participate in this business. Here's a statistic. We all look at Ethiopia and we all have these kids that are starving and it's a terrible, terrible, terrible situation, right? Okay? If an alien came and looked at this data, they would think human beings were completely stupid. Because look at this data. There are 80 million people in Ethiopia. They consume 11 million tons of food. Okay? Per year. There are 43 million livestock consuming 100 million tons of food. They're feeding the cattle 10 times as much as they're eating themselves. For what? But cattle is their currency. Okay, so they're starving, but they're feeding the cattle. And this is not true just of Ethiopia. We do that here too. The average person in the United States consumes 4 times as much grain as the average person elsewhere because we're feeding it to the cattle. The planet has 1.4 billion head of cattle. They weigh twice as much in total as human beings weigh. Okay? Their mass is twice as much as human beings. And the funny thing is, they only provide about 1.5 or something like 2% of global calories. Why are we keeping these things alive? We're basically plundering the earth to feed these animals. 1.4 billion cattle on earth, they eat the tigers. How many tigers do we have? 3,200 in the wild. So this number will go to 0 in 20 years, for sure. There are more tigers in the United States in zoos than there are in the wild around the world. Okay, so that's as crazy as that. Because the tigers need space and their space is gone. Their 93% of the habitat is gone. Okay. And you look at the picture, this is an interesting paper that I dug up of livestock biomass in the 1500s versus pretty much now. Okay? You look at how many livestock used to be around versus how many of the other animals, elephants and camels and wild beasts and so on and so forth. Now it's all we have on earth, more and more, is sheep, pigs and cows. Okay? And we've gotten rid of all other species pretty much. And we're just feeding these guys. We're just feeding these guys. We're not even feeding people, we're feeding these guys. Okay. And you look at where the fires are around the world in 2 different seasons. December, July. This is NASA data, okay, taken from space. And you can correlate it 1-to-1 to grazing land. Okay? Where there's grazing, there are no forests. And you look at the yield per hectare of all of these food items. Per hectare, you get 0.01 tons of meat. You get 35 tons of potatoes. Okay. And this is polyphase. Oh, by the way, this is polyphase farm. If you look online, this is the ideal meat producing farm. Okay, it's completely sustainable. It's in Michael Pollan's book. They do a rotation basis. Okay, and it's touted as the way to do meat. And even that is at 0.75 tons per hectare. This is going to blow your mind. To produce 200 grams of meat, if you produce 200 grams of meat, you release 16 kilograms of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That is equivalent to burning 6 200-page books. Take the books, burn it, right? And you eat a slice of steak, you've done the same amount of damage to the atmosphere. Okay. And the funny thing is, 40 kilograms of pasta has the same emissions as 200 grams of meat. One serving of meat, 40 kilograms of pasta, okay? And it's all, of course, based on this whole protein myth that you can get protein from plants. And it's just completely unsustainable, unscientific view. 40 kilogram pasta has enough protein for 80 people for a day. Okay? Even in the United States, this is an epidemic. If you look at the United States data from 1910 to now, in terms of meat consumption, this is the way the data looks. Let's just take one instance of chicken. Okay, we were here in terms of, and this is units of pounds per year per person. Okay, so we were about 10 pounds for chicken, and now we are at 60 pounds a year per person for chicken alone. And if you look at where it all started, that is when Kentucky Fried Chicken came online. Okay? You look at beef. Beef was here. And it started taking off there. That's when McDonald's came online. For US consumption alone, we killed 60 billion creatures. 10 billion land animals and 50 billion sea animals a year. You see why I was forced to connect the dots. I can't participate in this anymore. I cannot look my children in the eye. I'm letting this happen. And I'm not doing anything about it myself. I would be a hypocrite. So I checked out. I don't participate in this process anymore. Not even to the extent of milk. No. I won't do it. In the US alone, each year, 150 million cattle are killed. 8 billion chickens. 8 billion. Thanksgiving, 15 million turkeys. One day. So staggering numbers. Why didn't we think anymore about these numbers? Have we lost all our sense of compassion? We were supposed to take care of the earth. We're doing a fine job of it. We go to churches, synagogues, temples, and we seem to supplicate the Creator when we're destroying His creation. And it's not just me. People have talked about this for a long time. People we all know. That's, of course, a very famous quote of Einstein, but people don't know. They always quote this, but they never quote this one. Einstein was vegan for the last part of his life. So was Edison. You were thinking. I can name a lot more. People you would expect. Emerson, C.S. Lewis, Thoreau,